I think, as Kenny said earlier, that I think we're at the point now that this has been declared a pandemic, that it's virtually impossible to contain it, and it's going to become widespread. And also, as Kenny said, the NBA community is not immune, and so it's going to spread throughout our community as well. What had happened yesterday was that we had a Board of Governors meeting. It was by conference call, and some NBA League committee meetings with some groups of our owners as well. And the very purpose of the meeting was to decide what our next step should be. I had been talking to your colleague, Grant Hill, former NBA great, who's also on the board of the NCAA, and he had been filling me in on their discussions about facing the decision as to whether they should play at that point. They've obviously canceled at this point, but whether they should play with or without fans. And some of the same experts, in particular, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who used to be the Surgeon General of the United States under Obama, was advising us both. And the truth is, up till a few days ago, or even up till yesterday, the experts were unclear as to whether, as a public health matter, NBA arenas should be emptied. I think there was a clear consensus that for people over 70 or people who have any sort of underlying ailment or a compromised immunity system, that they should not be coming. But again, it was an open issue. So we had a board meeting. We had scheduled one for Wednesday and one for today. The purpose of the one Wednesday was so that we could run through every team and get their point of view. We have some owners who have a fair amount of expertise. Mickey Arison, who owns Carnival Cruise Lines, who's dealt with these issues for years, and others who had opinions. And essentially the discussion was, should we attempt to play our games without fans in the arenas? Would that be safe? Or we should take some sort of hiatus. And then the plan was for the league office to process that information and then have another discussion today and make a decision. The call went on for several hours, and I was heading home, I think around 8 o'clock or so last night, and I got a call from the league office that we had just learned, literally is right before tip of that Utah Jazz Oklahoma City game, that Rudy Gobert, and I'm almost only saying his name because he made it public that he was one of the players that ultimately we learned tested positive, that although he had been separated from his team the day before because he had been running a fever, and once his test came back positive, we needed to make a decision whether we were then going to cancel the game. And the fans were in the seats, ready to go. We were now 5 or 10 minutes past the point we were supposed to tip. I spoke to Clay Bennett, who was there, owner of Oklahoma City Thunder, Sam Presti, the GM, and also spoke to some representatives of the Utah Jazz. And I think we quickly agreed that this should not, of course, be a business decision. We should be listening to the public health experts, Oklahoma City, and the team doctors. They conferred and fairly quickly decided we should not be playing. And then I think I officially canceled the game. And immediate issue was clearing the building of fans and not alarming anybody. And then we waited till the fans were out. And then we made that decision since I knew I'd had the benefit of several hours of meetings that day with representatives of every team on the issue of a hiatus. It seemed in that moment we made the decision that at the expiration of that last night's games, we should be taking a hiatus, knowing again we would have a chance to meet and have further discussions today. So that was the decision, as you know. Then we ended up later that night all reconvening because one of the referees at the Sacramento Kings New Orleans game had also been in touch with the Utah Jazz. That referee had had a meeting earlier in the day with the other two referees, so then we made a decision to cancel that game as well.
Adam, I want to confer with Kenny and Shaq. Say, man, we're so blessed to have you as a commissioner. You made so many great decisions. And I just want to applaud you on this one because, a lot of times in sports, money overrules all common sense. But this thing is so scary. We don't know anything about it. And, one thing about NBA players, we're probably the most famous people in the world. And you have so many kids and so many people coming up for you, asking for autographs, taking pictures with you. If a bunch of these players had this thing, it could be catastrophic for a lot of people.
It's a great point. I mean, of course, our concern first and foremost is for the safety of our players, our fans, everyone in this NBA community, people working in arenas, and those fans who come to our games. But to your point, when you think about a social network, we all think of social network now in terms of the internet and digital communities, but where social networks begin are people moving around. And as you guys were saying earlier, I mean, players, if you think of one of those maps in the country of where planes go, that's what players do. They move from city to city. And I think that's where, from a public health standpoint, they're particularly focused on them, because if there are clusters of this ailment and there's a cluster in one part of the country and then they get up and travel to another part, and when, as you know, when they're in those communities, they're in contact with people in the arenas, they're in contact with people in restaurants, hotels, and other places, that's how a virus can spread. I think there is an issue now in terms of how quickly this virus is spreading. It's what we have to determine is what, if anything, can be done to not necessarily stop the spread or slow it down. And again, we're relying on the public health experts. What they're telling us is that even if you can so-called shift the curve or flatten the curve, if we can push out how quickly this spreads as a public health matter, we're doing a service to the country, because particularly for old people, if a lot of people get sick quickly, we're going to run out of resources, we're going to run out of respirators, ICU beds, etc. So that the players are very unique in that situation because of the social network around them.
Adam, I think overall, what I think we all have admired and all we recognize is part of leadership is having a clear derivative and a clear direction. So for me, my question would be, what is the clear direction to say this is going to make us play again? So what is that? What are we looking for that to happen?
Yeah, right. I just say, back to Charles's point in terms of our direction, when in the two sort of full board meetings I had yesterday and today, not one team raised money. The entire discussion was about the safety and health of the players, the community around the NBA, and our fans. And so, of course, the issue becomes now, what we determined today is that this hiatus will be most likely at least 30 days. I mean, and we don't know enough, as you've all said, to be more specific than that, but we wanted to give direction to our players and teams and to our fans that this is going to be roughly at least a month. But then the question becomes, is there a protocol, frankly, with or without fans, in which we can resume play? And I think the goal, and been talking a lot to Michelle Roberts, the Players Association, just talked to Chris Paul, the president of the union, again earlier tonight, and in coming together, what makes sense here, and without compromising anyone's safety. And I think it's frankly too early to tell. Again, it depends how quickly this virus spreads, and it also depends on what the theory is going to be and how to treat it. We may get fairly quickly to a point, you guys were mentioning flu earlier, where, well, based on everything we know, this is significantly more serious than the common flu, at least in the United States. We may ultimately get to a point where it's treated by treating symptoms in those who are sick rather than this sort of quarantine containment strategy. And that would mean, for example, if a player was running a temperature, or you, Charles, like for example, were not feeling well, you would treat that player. You wouldn't necessarily then quarantine the rest of the team. So that is something we have to look at. Again, we're conferring with all the experts, and we also recognize that because of how high profile our players are, that others in the public will take their lead from us. In fact, we don't talk a lot about it, and Rudy Gobert has acknowledged that he made a huge mistake by fooling around and touching the mics and all, doing that the other day when he had no idea that he had the virus. And something we spoke to him today, in fact, about doing a public service announcement with the league, just because we know the public follows what these players do, and we want to make sure people understand how important the protocol is of washing your hands thoroughly for 20 seconds, of not touching your face after you've washed your hands, about maintaining social distance in certain situations. So we actually think we can use this hiatus to use this platform we have on social media to help people deal with this disease.
So when you were making the decision last night, you used the word suspend. What was your thought process in saying, okay, we're going to suspend the rest of the league as opposed to cancel the rest of the season?
You know, the thought process, first of all, I mean, this was a split-second decision, so that was the word I chose in the moment. Maybe a better word that could have been used, but I also felt at the same time that given, unlike, the Final Four, which is the month of March, as you guys well know, our season, goes well into June, and I was also thinking at the time, and I had talked to our television partners, the folks at Turner, and ESPN about ABC, about possible contingencies. We recognized that there was a chance we might be stopping the season. And I think everybody, especially in a crisis like this, indicated absolute willingness to work together. Again, and we had already met yesterday with the Players Association as well before we knew anything about a positive test. So my thinking, Shaq, was, even if we're out for a month, even if we're out for 6 weeks, we could still restart the season. It might mean that then the finals take place in July, late July. Just my feeling was it was way premature to suggest that we had lost the season. It's and again, it may seem odd at the same moment that we're saying for health reasons we need to take a break to talk about restarting it, and that the notion of at least 30 days was just to try to give people some guidance. I mean, I'll say one thing: it's remarkable to be here talking to you guys tonight about this hiatus when it was only yesterday that first the NCAA made that decision to play without fans, which seemed, and was unprecedented, was a historic decision, and we were having the same discussion to be jumping here one day later, and I think it only makes the point that on this issue and all the things we've all dealt with for so many years, you could say, well, it changes day by day. This literally changes hour by hour in terms of what we know. So it was really a moment for us to step back, take a breath, ensure that everyone in the NBA community was safe and healthy and doing everything they needed to do to care for their families, and then give us some time to deliberate and figure out if there's a way that we can resume playing at some point.
Adam, is it possible that the season will not continue?
Of course it's possible. I just don't know more at this point. I mean, there's another factor that may go to the seasonality of this virus. Again, I've talked to a lot of experts. It's a little clear. Some have a theory that it's just as with the common flu, as the weather changes, we may see it begin to peter out a little bit. I mean, again, we don't know. So, at this point, we're just waiting. One of the things we want to do during this hiatus, and this is one of the things, I had a meeting with our general managers and team presidents late this afternoon by conference call to talk about how are we going to use this time, decisions as to whether the players will stay in market. Understandably, some of the players may play in a market, but their families may live in another city. Will they be rejoining their families? What's the best way to keep them safe? What's the best way to keep them in shape? All those things are still on the table because this has happened so quickly.
Adam, you've been more than gracious with your time tonight. We truly appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. And we'll stay in touch. And again, well done on doing something that's nobody wanted to see, but nobody can really argue with, given the magnitude of this situation. So thank you very much.